G'day, mate, and how the bloody hell are ya? This is In the Back of My Head podcast, episode 60. Oh, it's a weekly creative journal, a little podcast I do. A chance for me to get some thoughts out from the back of my head into a hot mic, try and reset my head a little bit. Rather than have things rattling around, it's good to say them out loud, put them down, either in writing or, in this particular case, podcast format. If you get something out of it, fantastic. Oh, I hope you enjoy it. Otherwise, be well, move on to the next thing. Man, I've been struggling to do this. I've been struggling to record a podcast that no one listens to. This is the lowest stakes. It's the lowest stakes format. It's the lowest stakes audience of, my mates. A few mates that might tune into this. But then there's always the worst fucking critic of us all, which is our own selves, our own heads. And it's to the point now of, this is take probably 8 or 9 now, that I just cannot get past the first few minutes. And I think it's the desire for more depth to a thing that maybe doesn't need to have a depth. I mean, I start every episode of this with, this is a weekly creative journal, and I do want it to be that, but I also want to elevate it to a degree at some stage. I've got a cracker of an episode planned in the works that's actually taking a bit of fucking research. My god, I never do any real research. I'm excited about that. I have a CD coming in the mail, coming from Greece, that is going to be hopefully very exciting, that I'm going to talk about the history of that CD. But in the meantime, thinking about journaling or scrapbooking or anything that is a landmark on the timeline, let's say. Because I was talking to some poets last night. Last night we had our last poetry night at Radio Bar. And it was a beautiful time, as it always is. People sharing their hearts, their souls, wearing them on their sleeves, presenting them to the people. Tears were shed, laughs were loud, merry, drinks were scoffed. My god, I had a celebratory martini at the end, and that really tipped me over the edge. But we've started chatting with local poets in the scene, talking about, hey, we want to help publish a book of yours. We have a couple here. We have Clean Pages, Filthy Ink. For any people listening on Spotify, I'm holding up a yellow book called Clean Pages, Filthy Ink. That's by Antonio Montaigne. And then we also have Chaotic Musings, which is our anthology of various poets from the scene. Volume 1 and 2. There is a book of mine. There is another book of mine in the works. That's a slow process, and will come when it comes. We have the book by Jason. My point is that we want to continue growing this little library that we're developing of local poets. And it could be short stories, it could be a novel if you want it to be, but we're going to help you format it, put it out. And a line came from someone last night, mid-conversation, that they were kind of nervous to put anything out as but I don't know when my stuff's finished. I don't know if it's worthy, basically, of a book. I'm paraphrasing massively, but the sentiment was, when is my project ready to be in its final form? Which, first of all, doesn't have to be its final form. You can change it. I could re-release all the music that I've released with remixes or re-edits or fucking re-record the whole damn things. That's fine. I can scrap every podcast and reuse the same topics and just do them again, I can rewrite every poem. There's no finality, but I do subscribe to the finality. Finality? Is that the right word I'm looking for? I do subscribe to the idea of putting it down in a format does kind of force you to move on to the next thing. But I started thinking about the way we phrase these things. We phrase these little projects that we're working on. And this, in particular case, is a podcast. And a podcast is such a loose format, which is part of the reason I like it. It's a weird one, because my favorite podcasts are highly produced and done by very incredible professional people, usually comedians. But the reason I started doing this podcast is because I listened to Bill Burr's Monday Morning Podcast. Now, Bill Burr is a brilliant comedian. He's a riffer. He can just go on and on. He can go off the top. So to compare oneself to such a podcast, of course, would be insane. However, hearing the relaxed nature of flick on microphone, talk into microphone, put it out there, that was very appealing to me. On one sense, it's such low effort. In the other sense, it's a very raw and free format of just putting out your emotions into the world and getting them out from the back of your head into the real world. Forcing you to say something rather than just rattling around, which is, again, as I said at the start of this podcast, kind of the point of this one. But I also like that idea in terms of, putting out some books and what have you. Of the idea of, say, mixtapes. In the world of, it's an interesting one in the world of, in the world of hip-hop, I think has a particular take on that idea. I think in the more traditional record industry, there's this sense of, it's not just hip-hop, but it's a good example, I think, of, a band comes out and then they release an album, or they might release an EP to kind of test the waters, and then will come out an album. And it's a big hullabaloo. It's a real big statement. Here's my first album. I released my first album, quote unquote, like 7 years ago, maybe longer now. And looking back on them, you could call them mixtapes. I like that in the hip hop scene, that a mixtape back in the day, less so now. I think the line is blurred a lot thanks to the internet. But if you wanted to put out something that was a little bit rawer, a little bit looser, just a tease, you might grab a collection of beats. Also, back in the day, it was you would probably be using hot beats that were already out and famous and playing on radio. So you technically weren't allowed to use them. And so you would grab that beat, put it onto a mixtape and rap over top of that, and then you would just distribute it yourself. Burnt CDs, passing them out at parties, passing them out at shows and what have you. Very underground, very punk, very very raw. In a sense that it is lower effort, it's lower stakes. You can put a lot of effort into a mixtape. You can put a lot of effort into a journalistic podcast. You can put a lot of effort into any of these things. But taking the edge off of what it is, that it has to be this grandiose art piece rather than just a sketchbook. Looking back, say if you take a famous musician, let's go to the Beatles, right? If you didn't know who the Beatles were before the Beatles were famous, and they start dropping, imagine they just started dropping offcuts. They start dropping, here's just our random demo bullshit from the studio. Kind of no one will give a fuck, right? But then after, years and years later, after they become the Beatles, and the Beatles are now obviously no longer performing because 2 of them are dead, you take those off-cuttings, you take those random studio sessions, little studio banter, little studio demo versions, you put those out, how the fans would lap that shit up. And putting them out otherwise takes the pressure off that, but it can be very exciting. Was that a terrible example? I feel like it's kind of a terrible example. I feel like I'm running around like a dickhead in this idea. I think the way we phrase these things to ourselves does really change our relationship with them. Yeah, the term podcast has a very wide range of things that it can be. One of my favorite podcasts of all time is Blowback, which is a history of various conflicts and mostly centered around communism, or rather US involvement in disrupting communist nations. Fascinating, and I think the best produced show I've ever heard. Best produced podcast I've ever heard. And it is a show. It's obviously a lot of research, massive script, high production quality. It's funny, that's in the same medium as something like Bill Burr's podcast, which is just flick the switch on, fucking waffle on for 30 minutes to an hour, call it a bloody day. Serving 2 very different purposes, but yeah, there's a different way you can phrase these things, I think, that will allow you to approach them with the appropriate energy. Not necessarily effort. I don't want them to be low effort, but I want like a journal entry doesn't want to be scripted in the same way as a research topic. The topic that I've got coming up in a few weeks will be a real hunk of a script, I think. There'll be some moments of rambling, but at the most part, it's got to be put together like that. I'm excited about that. I was thinking, but that's not every time. That can't be every time. It actually defeats the purpose. It actually defeats the purpose of a journal entry. That's what I want to think about with these books as well. And it depends on who's writing them. It depends on how they feel about it, obviously. But for someone to say, I don't know if my stuff's ready for a book. I think, mate, is it a book? It's physically, technically a book, but this is just a mixtape. These are just little doodles. These are little sketchbooks. These are our ideas. They're loose. They're raw. And you're in a little poetry scene. It's good to have our little collections of poetry and we hand them out to each other, so we all have copies of the incredible work that some of us do. I like that idea a lot. I came across the other day a video on YouTube all about the indie internet, which is a concept that I've not really encountered before. But the indie internet is a phenomenon, and I'm just riffing with this. I can't remember fully what I saw, but I like the idea of it a lot. The indie internet is a little phenomenon that has cropped up of people using website hosting platforms that are not like Squarespace, in the sense of like Squarespace is drag and drop block form, you know? It's very graphically easy on the eyes, it's very user friendly, it's very professional in a sanitized kind of way. And then these services that the indie internet is built upon is more classic. Back in the day, a website was just hard coded. Your website on the back end is just a string of numbers and letters. It's code. It's computer language. That's not revolutionary, you all understand that. But taking it back to that is kind of fascinating. And this indie internet is being used it's not just for the novelty of building in that code, because you can just do that anyway with any website. But what it's being used for is custom websites, your own personal websites, which Squarespace talks about a lot when they do their ads. They say, you could start a personal blog. Pay us $200 a year to have a personal blog. That's fucking wild. There is other options, obviously, you know. There are options for personal blogs out there that don't cost that kind of money. I feel like that's fallen by the wayside to a degree. I guess because, okay, let's talk about this. Let's think about this. Two websites come to mind for me that I've tried to use as little folios, as little portfolios, as little scrapbooks, journal entries. This is a little piece of me. Come and have a little look at a little piece of me. Part of it is a beacon. Part of it is, you know, calling out to the rest of the internet saying, hello, I'm here. You can come and have a chat with me if you'd like. Look at the things that I do. Oh, don't I deserve a couple of your coins, please? Throw a couple of coins in the bucket. But also it's like scrapbooking when you're younger is a very personal journey of trying to collect everything that you've witnessed, everything that you've thought, and put it together into a bit more of a cohesive package, not presenting it in a way of this is a final art piece. You don't put a scrapbook in an art museum necessarily. Obviously, it's a beautiful medium that could be, right? No, but the intent behind it is kind of very, very different to a fancy oil painting of a landscape or a royal figure. I don't fucking know. And I feel like that's what we were doing back in the day. Something like MySpace is a good example of that. I think MySpace really was that sense of scrapbooking, that sense of journaling, that sense of here's my little personal space. This is my little studio that I work in. Here's my favorite songs this week. Here's some art that I like. Here's a little poem that I wrote. You know, those early social media platforms were much more centered around that. Facebook had a little bit of that, but not nearly the same level of customization. And I think there's the key for me. The level of customization is totally left by the wayside. Is that, yeah, left by the wayside. Is that the right fucking term? Instagram can be used kind of as a portfolio, which is sort of how I've used it in the past, maybe less so now. It's still a little bit of a collection of all the things that I'm doing and things that I'm interested in, but not to the same degree as MySpace was back in the day. And I'm not like, I think MySpace still exists as well, but I'm not fucking running off back to MySpace. But I really like the idea of having a personal website where you have full, total control to put all these things together. Gather your favorite songs, Pokemon, shows that you're watching, leave some reviews for those shows, you know, a place to collect all the thoughts in your head and put them in one space. And this indie internet scene is using the aesthetic of the 90s as well. So those 90s style, 90s and early 2000s style websites that were janky as all hell and aesthetically very displeasing back in the day, now has a nostalgic aesthetic to it, which is just funny that something that once looked trash, now you go, ooh, that's actually dope. And so much of that is obviously rooted in that nostalgic feeling of, well, I felt like I understood the world, I felt like I was safe at a certain point, and these things remind me of that. Things like old tech, old bubbly icons, that old 3D style that, I hate, but I kind of love it. And these websites lean into all that kind of shit. So I guess then, using that aesthetic and using it for that intended purpose of scrapbooking, collecting your thoughts, is a marriage made in heaven. It's partly what some websites like. I think YouTube is really good for this. And I saw a video, maybe like 6 months ago or so, who remembers? I saw a video saying, you should start a YouTube channel. Everyone should start a YouTube channel. And I saw that and I watched this video about it, and I really like that idea, which is sort of what we're doing with this one as well. Isn't it a really beautiful thing to just create these random bits and pieces and put it out there into the world, ideally not with the intent of, oh, I just want to catch the wave of the algorithm, though that is embedded into our brains. But going into it with a sense of just, no, I'm just doodling, I'm just sketching, I'm just journaling, I'm just scrapbooking. These terms take the edge off, and I think are really important to hold on to. Not everything is content. Not everything is content, but not everything is like a finished work of art either. Doesn't have to, content feels like shovelware to me, content just feels like filling the trough. While an art piece, I picture an art gallery. Of course, to just sketch, doodle, what have you in the background. At home, just doing it for yourself and putting it up on your wall. No one else has to see it. It's all well and good, but we're very social creatures. Humans are very social creatures, and we like to share. So I think it's good for the psyche to put that stuff out there. I think it's good for your mental health to put it out there just for the sake of that. Just for the sake of it. Holding on to it feels like it's putting a lot of weight to it, which maybe it is deserving of if it's if it's an amazing piece. But you can edit it, you can change it later, and it might be worth just sticking it up for the sake of it. Did any of that make sense? It's a very, as is every episode of this, it's a very me-centric little thought process. I mean, it's my podcast. It's actually literally the point of this episode that I'm talking about, But I do want to get into that mindset. I want to get into that mindset of, there's these things that I'm doing, podcasting, what have you, that is, the journal entries that are the ones that are just, those are loose, those are raw, those are fun, those are silly, those are chances to just tell you about my favorite video games, tell you about my favorite music, get some thoughts out the back of my head into a hot mic. I say that at the start of the episode, but I don't know if I actually go into it with that intent. I don't know if I actually go into these things with that intent. Same with releasing music or doing anything. I guess we are really bombarded. We are bombarded by the social media age of the internet with ideas of blowing up, the ideas of catching that algorithmic wave, the idea of, what is this actually? How far is this going to take you? But the indie internet has no interest in such things. I'll link I'll link to the video. I don't know where to link to for the indie internet. I'll link to the video that I'm referencing. But like, MySpace back in the day, I don't think we didn't go into that. Oh, Tumblr is another good example. I hate to say that I was a bit of a Tumblr guy, but I was for a little while. But that was kind of a fun time. That was a fun time of just, here's all my favorite things, and here they are collected. This is my little space. It's sticking up posters of your favorite celebrities, or musicians, or superheroes, or what have you on your wall, and going, hell yeah, those are my favorite things. That's cool, that's fun, it's very fulfilling, it warms your soul, it fuels your soul, and it'll probably fuel better creative practices further down the road. That's some thoughts on scrapbooking and journaling. Hey, be very well to yourself, be very good to yourself. If you enjoy these podcasts, if you enjoy anything I do, if you enjoy the music that I make, then you can chuck me a couple of bucks on the Patreon. Or you can go and check out Vibe Union's Patreon and help us out there, where I do, host all the events that we do and all that yada yada yada. Help us out as starving artists, but you're probably a starving artist too, so, we're all down here in the muck together. But a couple of bucks makes a huge difference. I love you very much. Be well.